Hello out there, and welcome to the No Shit Cast, flagship podcast, the X Factory Creative Network. I'm your host, Matt Frazier. Tonight's guest and co-host, the great wizard of historical knowledge himself, Mr. Eric D. Smith. How you doing tonight, Eric?
Good, Matt. Very well, thank you.
So we've had a heck of a run here, folks. A ton of interesting guests have been on the show. Just amazed and I guess humbled and all those really positive words for just the turnout of and support that we've had for the show so far. And this is the first show that we've done. What are we on now? This is number 26, I think, or something like that. 27.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah. Something like that.
So the vast majority of these podcasts that we've done has been a podcast where we've had some guest, whether it's an author or an artist or a musician or game designers. I mean, it's just been crazy. A rap musician, a rap artist out of Australia. It's just been amazing to kind of look back on and think about all of the different interesting people we've had the chance to talk to and stuff like that. But we're real excited about this, folks, because this is the first time you and I have had to do, gotten to do a podcast where we didn't have a guest or some specified agenda, which is really how this whole idea got started to begin with, right?
Yeah. When we first started, we wanted to pick interesting topics and discuss them and have people become aware of those topics. And that kind of morphed from that into wanting to talk about things that people were passionate about, because it's almost the same thing. It's still a deep level of appreciation of some sort of a subject matter that maybe not everyone would be aware of. So like when we were pointing people to things that we thought were really interesting when we first started doing this, we kind of ran out of things we thought were interesting, started inviting other people in, and hey man, this stuff is interesting too. And
yeah, it was an easy source of interesting topics.
Yeah,
is interviewing other people by far, because it's harder to interview yourself.
Yeah, and definitely harder to hit something so in depth if you don't actually have a topic lined up, But there's a myriad of topics that can be recapped and or pointed to, and get people to check these things out and see what they think and find something out interesting.
When I was thinking about doing this again, and I was thinking about, man, I got to come up with all kinds of interesting shit to talk about, where we wouldn't, a podcast where we didn't have a specified guest or whatever, right? But I just started programming again, primarily as my day job, right? My primary profession. And one of the things I like to do when I program is I like to have some sort of noise or something running in the background. And there's been an Ancient Aliens marathon on. So that's the kind of shit that's been, feeding into my head.
Trying to get
like
out
that.
through the frontal lobe in some way.
And it raises some real interesting questions, right? Because we were just talking about this last night, and you had this really interesting point about ancient civilizations, right? We were talking about how for some reason ancient civilizations felt the need to build these incredibly large structures and enormous structures and things like that, right?
Not just enormous structures, but the need to make these enormous, because I had trouble coming up with that word, anthropology.
Okay.
The anthropological reason that you get for people building megalithic structures in that time period was basically a combination of that, because it was supposed to last, which is why they were working in stone, and that it was supposed to be big because it represented big ideas or the gods themselves and things like that, with the pyramids and things like that. But that's fine. I can get behind that. But the thing I'm having trouble with is, where did they say let's do it in 50-ton stones?
Right. Because when because when you could build stuff, you could build enormous structures with a lot of little pieces.
Yeah.
And that would be far easier to do.
And they did
right?
do that. Like before they started building pyramids, in particular the ancient Egyptians, they made mastabas,
Right.
which it's like an Arabic word for bench, and they started stacking these mastabas on top of each other, and that's kind of how the first step pyramids became a reality. And of course those were the earliest types of pyramids, was the step pyramids, and then later the normal kind. So, when they were making these mastabas, they were using smaller bricks to make them and stuff, right? It wasn't until later on for them that they started using 20-ton, 10-ton, 20-ton, 30-ton sized stones to make these structures. And it's not just the ancient Egyptians. I mean, it's everywhere in that time period, in the Paleolithic time period. There's stones in Karnak. There's stones, of course, in Stonehenge. And these stones that they're building with, not only are they huge, but they're getting them from specific places where only they can quarry these kinds of stones. Like they're using diorite stones, which are super, super hard, or sarsen stones, because of the color and stuff like that. So,
it's like they said, hey, let's do this thing, and let's do it the absolute hardest way
you
possible.
Can. What are you doing? Well, we're just making a circle, and we're going to put a cap on it. Well, that sounds good. Yeah, but 50-ton stones.
Yeah.
What?
Right.
Look, they don't even have the pulley. The ancient Egyptians, the ancient Celts, I mean, nobody really had a convenient way of moving large things. So where would the idea come from in the first place?
Wait a minute. You got to explain that to me a little more, though. You said they didn't even have the pulley?
No, they weren't.
Yeah, but a pulley is an incredibly basic device.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody has a pulley. If you throw a rope over something, you have a pulley, right? So can you really say? Are you saying they didn't have the pulley, like, with the wheel, with the pin and the bearing and things like that to reduce?
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, like a mechanical pulley, but
they could have thrown a rope over things, and they did, but they didn't have any type of mechanics to make any of that easier. So I guess what I'm saying is that when it comes to lifting very, very large things, they didn't really have worldwide, through different cultures, a convenient and easy way. I mean, obviously they did make these things, and obviously they came up with ways to make these things, but it couldn't have been something that was obvious and easy to these people, because they weren't sharing information and they didn't have mechanics, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes down to making something this large, that's fine. But, again, it's like, where do you get the idea to build with these stones that weigh tons?
And so and they're quarried, right? They're like, they just didn't go out and, there's a big rock that's close to what we need. Let's use that one. Yeah.
To make them giant rocks. Like,
so they were cut to specific sizes, and I think I saw this on a documentary when they were talking about when they made the Great Pyramids, right? When they were quarrying those stones, they knew how many hundreds of stones ahead of time, or whatever it was ahead of time. How they had to know how big they were needed to be, so that when they arrived, they were the next ones going into because it wasn't like they just.
They had full-on plans for using 20-ton stones.
So if you think about the logistics of that, like today, that would be tough. We call it just-in-time manufacturing and stuff like that, and we use all of these incredible technologies and databases and computers and things like that to schedule things and make sure that because nobody wants to stock a shit ton of anything, because that's wasted capital if you're a business, right? Well, in the case of something like this, it's kind of the same thing in the sense that you just didn't have a lot. I mean, you just didn't want to be stacking these rocks up everywhere and then, running around going, is that one close to the size we need?
Right.
And then so what they were doing is somehow they were communicating. There was a communications channel that was taking place where they were pre-cutting stones.
And again, that doesn't amaze me. And these quarries they were cutting
was
miles away.
But you're saying they didn't have the pulley. Like, think about the logistics necessary to pull just that piece off, right? So that it wouldn't take 10 times longer to build these pyramids, right? There was this logistical channel that was happening. That's incredibly advanced, man.
The thing to me, though, that doesn't amaze me, right? Because they still had their kingdoms and their governmental systems, and in Egypt, the gnomes and the various things that they did. But again, what amazes me is that there was this system in place that you're talking about,
right,
for 20-ton stones.
Oh, I know. I mean, just baffling the size of the
like,
endeavor
why are they
to begin
working
with,
in,
right?
in that
And those kind of units of measure,
pixelated, structure like that. Like, why wouldn't it be obvious that if you were using smaller units, you could get more efficiency out of these things, right?
Well,
you could more assembly line them.
Is it possible then, Eric, that it would be something like this, where why work in those scales? Because only a king of a nation like that, or just an absolute empowered, deified like individual, like a pharaoh was,
in
right?
Egypt, but not
right. Well, wait. Would only be powerful enough to erect. It would take somebody of equal power to take it apart, because it was erected with such a large scale. So it would be like an eternal representation of, like, today, I guess we could blow the pyramids up, right, and stuff like that, but it would be an undertaking to take that apart even today with modern technology, right?
I don't know. I disagree with that, man. I disagree with all counts of that. The idea of it being a deified emperor,
right?
There are stones in the Celtic regions of the ancient times, the Karnak and Stonehenge. There are large megalithic structures out in Machu Picchu.
Yeah, because what you're saying is it isn't just an ego thing.
No, it's not
obviously.
Just deity kings. I mean, like, tribal areas have still erected megalithic structures that are huge stones, right? And figured out their own ways to do it. So it's not the common denominator is not how powerful the king is or who he can command or organize, right? Because that can be done on smaller, large scales we've seen in ancient times with the kingdom of Egypt and small tribal Celtic people who used Stonehenge, right? And when it comes to talking about disassembling them, if you're talking about disassembling them in such a way that they could reassemble them, yeah, that would be just as difficult. But they stopped, at least in Egypt, they stopped using these megalithic structures with these large stones because people were still getting into the tombs. I mean, even back in ancient times.
It didn't prevent. So you're saying that it was
tomb
well?
robbing.
Okay, so then that answers your question, doesn't it? Then it was done. It was originally done as some sort of security measure.
No, because there were things like hinges, which are basically stone circles, and there was lines, and there's like the Nazca lines. There's all these large megalithic structures that aren't trying to encapsulate or protect or be a tomb. They're for diverse reasons. And in a lot of cases, we don't even know what the reasons are for, but they were definitely useful to the cultures that made them, and they're not something that tries to encapsulate or protect in every instance. But in every instance, they're using, if not stones that weigh tons, like tens of tons, they're making these giant lines across the desert, that are absolutely straight. So it's still like a megalithic structure.
Yeah, the Nazca lines are really trippy, because the thing that I always find remarkable about them is because some of the Nazca lines are like geometric shapes, and some of the Nazca lines are like animals. And I think there's a spider one, and there's like a llama, and there's probably a bunch more, but
yeah,
and then there's a man, like this weird
alien guy,
yeah, like going, hey, hello. But what I always thought was really interesting about it was when you looked at the when you look at the lines that are straight or they're making sharp angles, because they're making geometric shapes, they're like perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
And, I mean, they're just like someone used a roller,
like Riemannian geometry, not just Euclidean geometry, but straight over large curved surfaces.
But then when you look at the images in the Nazca lines of like the man and the llama and stuff like that, it looks like a kindergartner drew it, and it always trips me out, that dichotomy between those two. It's like, well, you would okay. Obviously, when they made the lines that were straight, it was a big freaking deal to have them be like laser straight. These things, I mean, like they set up like guideposts or something to make these things so straight. But when they make the ones that are of animals and things like that, it's like, a drunk sailor with a fat crayon on the back of an Applebee's, placemat. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to draw a llama.
Yeah, and one doesn't ever realize if they were using two different techniques to do these drawings,
Yeah.
or if they had just two different ritualistic ways of doing drawings.
Yeah, it's weird,
Because
right?
it's all hugely strange and weird. One thing I can say about it is that one of the things that I'm interested in is the study of how the ancients viewed dinosaur bones, right? Because dinosaur bones are found in every part of the world, everywhere.
Right.
And ancient people found these dinosaur bones. In fact, the best examples are the Greeks, who have where we have excavated ancient Greek temples that have Paleolithic dinosaur bones on the altar of the Greek temple, with Greek inscriptions carved into these dinosaur bones. And there has been a couple of studies where people have researched the legends of the Greeks on how their deities fought the Titans and had battles with the Titans, which were the early gods of their mythology, and looked at where they said these battlegrounds took place in their mythology, and have found that in almost every case where these battlefields were named in the Greek mythology, that they lined up with places where dinosaur graveyards were found, where there was some geological area.
So you're saying there's a study that connects this
Yes.
together.
Yeah, a couple of studies, yeah. Like, let's say there's a tar pit, right?
So they'd find a big, dinosaur femur and think that was a femur of a giant of some sort.
Yeah.
And make the connection that they were
giants in the earth. And
they were automatically human.
Yeah.
Why would they make the connection, though, that they were automatically human?
Because they were human. They said they did the same thing with their gods. When they envisioned their gods, they envisioned them as being like them.
No, I did. Okay, so no, I dig that, but why didn't they assume that it was just a giant water buffalo or a giant whatever was indigenous? Because they must have come across animal bones and carcasses and stuff of non-human things too. So, but there was something about it that made them make this connection that those beasts or whatever they were somehow super large and
the size.
And human.
The size of them denoted in their minds that they were godlike, or on the edge of being divine, just because of the size. You find this in a lot of ancient things. There's a lot of ancient depictions where they depict like the king or the pharaoh as being larger than everybody else and things like that. That idea comes from, in my mind, that idea comes from finding these large bones and believing that in the past, they interpret these things in different ways, right? Like there's a fairly good amount of evidence that the Greeks interpreted these bones as being anthropomorphic and of the gods that ruled the earth in the past, and they kind of developed this whole mythology to explain why all these titans are now dead or locked away, right? Because there was this civil war of deities, essentially, and this one side, the new gods, won, and now here's what the system is, right? So, their whole mythology could have been based upon their interpretation of finding these giant bones in the ground. Now, you take a person like Graham Hancock, who is pretty famous for talking about a civilization that was on the planet 10,500 BC, which is before the last ice age. And a lot of times he points to this civilization being the civilization of Atlantis, and he says that their standard was the dragon, and that the architectural things that they built typically were pyramids. And he says that that's the reason why you find pyramids in the Americas and South America and in North America, and you find them in Africa, and you find them in all these places around the world. And then he says that that's also why there's the legend of dragons in every culture, like from Chinese to Europe to to the Americans. There's these legends of dragons, but for me, this all ties into the ancient people finding these large dinosaur bones, and in their various ways interpreting what they found. In some instances, a lot of instances, these things were the old race, the old gods that ruled, and there had to be some sort of a mechanism that explained why you only find these things as dust in the wind and bones in the ground, right? So, these massive legends spring up about them. And my point to all of this is that is the only reason I could see why they might be talking about building things in such large stones and stuff like that. They had found these very oversized everything in the ground. They had found large teeth, large femurs, giant teeth, giant femurs, giant things that they couldn't even know what they were. And there have been examples of this. There have been examples of where we have found where the ancient Greeks had found a woolly mammoth skeleton, and they tried to make it anthropomorphic. They assumed that what they found
that's right
was
because the big hole in the center of the skull they assumed was an eye socket, right? So they just automatically assumed that this thing was a cyclops. This creature was a cyclops, right?
They automatically assumed it was human shaped, and then later on the mythology was made to fit what they had found, right? They knew of these things. Other people had found these things, but what are they? Well, we found the 2 or 3 of them. There must have been giants in that day, back in the day, and what happened to them? Well, and then you start looking into things like the Odyssey, where the Odyssey and the Iliad, and the Odyssey, where they're talking about Odysseus fighting the Cyclops on an island, and that Cyclops is the son of Zeus, right? So you find that these things that they have found in the ground and tried to make sense out of, they've done the best of doing that and putting it into myth and giving a reason for its existence and its reason for not being around anymore, and trying to place it within their cosmology, right?
It's funny, isn't it? Because it's the same story today. It's man trying to figure out how it actually fits into the grander scheme of things and fit itself in some sort of, like you said, whether it's a mythos or ancient historical story or whatever. The story sort of gets warped around what they currently have, what information they currently have to interpret.
Working as best we can. This is what we know.
They call all the elders and the wise people in to look at the skeleton.
What do you think these giant skulls?
Yeah, and they're all just looking at it, going, "I ain't got a clue what that is."
Yeah, but it was hard to kill though. Yeah. But it took like gods to kill.
Yeah,
probably 2 or 3 gods had to band up against it, or a hero maybe or something. Or...
It makes a lot of sense though that I guess when you kind of look when you think about it that way, because you got to put yourself in the mind state of a person of that time, who probably still thought the world was flat, and I mean a lot of things. The sun disappeared at night and onto a chariot or whatever, was delivered back the next day by
all those patterns like this, the sun and the stars and the 5 wandering planets probably made the ancients feel like those things were clues, like that. They seen the pattern. They also seen the randomness of life,
what they
right?
saw,
but they seen deeper within that whole randomness. They did see some patterns, right?
They knew that understanding those mysteries would be key to something.
Yeah.
If you could actually get down and completely understand those mysteries, that there was some sort of truth or knowledge that was inside of it.
And I think it's because of that. They see randomness and chaos everywhere in life, but yet there's these 5 planets that they can predict.
Right.
They see randomness everywhere, but all of a sudden they can predict a lunar cycle.
Right.
They see randomness everywhere, but all of a sudden they've got the equinoxes and the seasons and the planting, and it's like,
so in all of this weird chaos, there's all this weird
deeper
structure
meaning.
too.
And if
what the hell?
Yeah. So I mean, that's the kind of mystery, natural mystery that gives rise to things like alchemy, right? That weird blending between real and mystical. And it also points to the idea, how we've in the past talked about how psychogenic substances give rise to the idea,
stoned ape theory, right?
That there's this other world that if you take this substance, you're going to be able to bridge that gap. This deeper level of knowledge that we're talking about, and these patterns also give credence to the idea, when you're not stoned, that there's this deeper level. right? So you start putting in psychedelics into that, and every ancient religion was connected with psychedelics. I mean, we talked about that in the other podcast and named dozens of religions that back to various different psychotropic substances. You start combining these things together, this deeper understanding and this deeper level of connecting within yourself. There's your basis for mysticism. There's your bridge to a metaphysical world.
Does it make it less true, less real?
No, not at all.
You know what I mean? That's because isn't that really the last mystery that everyone's trying to solve? Well, not the last mystery, but you know what I mean? That's one of the great mysteries is it all by accident or is it all by some divine plan?
Well, I don't know about that, but I don't think that it makes, I don't think any of it's any less real. I mean, psychotropic substances and the chemical reactions that occur on a quantum level are real as it gets in reality. And there is no denying that there is a separation that needs to be bridged between the macro and the micro, or in this case, the quantum. You know, there's definitely got to be that bridge, and you see that bridge in photosynthesis in plants, and you see it in chemical reactions, and of course, like when we talk about the objective orchestrated reduction theory, it's talked about there. And that brings me to another thing that I wanted to mention. When we were talking about OrcOR last time, and we were talking about how there is on a Planck measurement level.
You're talking about the Planck scale, the smallest possible
unit of measurement.
Yep.
On that scale, this theory, and Roger Penrose believes that the space-time continuum has a structure to it. And it's that structure that is superimposed with a certain number of choices in any type of particle that is in superposition. And if you were to subscribe to the idea of objective reduction, you would also have to subscribe to the idea that there are no parallel universes, because the whole underlying principle of objective reduction is that a particle in superposition is either going to continue to be in superposition and create two different universes, or it's going to collapse into the wave function of the superposition is going to collapse into reality, and you're going to get one reality or the other, like they talk about with Schrodinger's cat, where the measurement makes this thing go from the probable to the certain, right?
Okay.
So if that doesn't happen, if it doesn't go from that, then you have so many probables that branch out. And this is where they get that idea of the parallel universe, that, you know, superposition could imply that there's two universes beside each other, superimposed, right?
But why only two?
Well, no, there could be, I'm using two as an easier number to just talk about. I mean, there would be billions potentially in this theory.
Okay, because I thought you just said that it means, if you subscribe to the orchestrated reduction, that it means that you only believe, that you don't believe in the multiverse, you only believe in two universes.
Oh no, you would just believe in one. Because what would happen? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
One reality or one
reality. There wouldn't be like a multiverse.
If you subscribe to that OrcOR is true, that there is no multiverse.
Right, because part of OrcOR, a main part of OrcOR is objective reduction, which objective reduction, what that does is it takes a particle that's superpositioned, and as that superposition grows, it can only get to a certain level, and then it collapses in on itself and becomes reality, right?
Okay.
So that's like one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is when it splits off and creates its own universe, where that universe is slightly different from this on the level of these subatomic particles, right? So you end up with jillions of universes, potentially parallel universes, where every time something in superposition doesn't collapse back into our reality, creates some other reality.
If you haven't listened to the OrcOR podcast we did way back, I don't know, 7 months ago at this point,
BC.
Yeah, right. Eric, kind of break this down. What OrcOR kind of from the 100,000 foot level is. It's sort of an explanation for things it has some real interesting ramifications if it were to ever to be proven true, and some of those ramifications are support for supernatural phenomena, or what we would consider to be supernatural phenomena today, right? So if you wouldn't mind, kind of recap what it is.
In the simplest of terms, it's just a theory on consciousness. You know, when consciousness being, I know, therefore I am, or I think, therefore I am, you know, just that idea of being aware that you're an individual consciousness. Like the classical idea of how that happens is that with enough data and enough switches that you're going to have what's considered to be emergence. You're going to have an emergent quality come out of all of this information, and that the interaction of all this information is you. You know, which is basically saying that your personality is in your head. And if you get brain damage and you destroy that data net, you're destroying you and your personality.
And there's kind of there is support for that theory.
That's the main theory.
And we see it today in things like artificial intelligence and some of the stuff that's going on there.
Yeah.
So there is support for that theory as well, I should say, because there's also support for this orchestrated OR objective reduction theory, right?
Yeah, and the difference is, and now that's the main theory. The
you
difference
got that, one is like what they call the hard problem of consciousness, and then OR is the other one, right?
Well, the hard problem of consciousness, as I understand it, is basically to explain why you make the choice that you make in any given moment of time, of consciousness, why you make the choice that you make, right? That's the hard problem. The easy problem of consciousness is that you are aware of things and can make a choice. The hard problem is, how do you actually make that choice? How does that happen?
It supposes that it's all life experiences and biology, right? Like
information.
So that it's 100% explainable through biology and information.
Yeah, that's the classic view. So basically saying that if you program a computer thick enough, it'll be aware enough of the variables, and it will just make a decision. It just happens, right? Nobody knows how it happens. It's in that view, it's almost magical, right? Yeah, just keep feeding the information, and one day it's able to
wakes up.
It wakes up, yeah. So to me, that's kind of like, I don't know, that's a little bit of magic or something, right? That's just, but I don't know, right? The difference in this is that it's saying that there's with OR theory of consciousness, it's saying that there is a connection between things that happen in the quantum world and things that happen in the macro world, the big world, right? And that borderline of where that happens is right on the borderline between the normal units of measurement and the Planck unit of measurement. That's where that occurs. That objectiveness between these choices that you're presented with happens at that point. And they explain it as being objective in the sense that the space-time of the universe will only allow for so many choices at one time and will eventually force down into one choice. And that in the brain, when that happens, when that mechanism that's a universal mechanism happens that creates our reality happens in the brain, that we're aware of those choices and we have influence over which of those it collapses into. That's the difference. So what it does is it takes the magic out of just, keep feeding it information and eventually it'll make a choice and become alive, into a actual thing that the brain is doing that mimics an idea that we have about how the whole universe and reality works, and that it's using that mechanism and kind of capitalizing on it, and it's that gives us consciousness.
And gives us a consciousness that's not
predetermined.
A consciousness that doesn't appear as like frames on a film. It gives you that continuous state of consciousness, because that collapse is continual basically until you die, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and perhaps even after that. It's
but where the woo starts, I call it the woo, right? The woo. Where that starts to happen, the woo-woo starts to happen, is when you start to think about things in those terms that, okay, so if consciousness is quantum, Okay, and what we do understand now, I think, is that everything that's quantum entangled is quantum entangled forever, right? So then it gets into the woo. Well, when you die, but because your consciousness is quantum entangled, because you're not constantly writing that collapse now, your consciousness sort of just goes back into the ether kind of thing, waiting to be reused again, sort of idea, right?
To a large extent, yes. The idea of entanglement probably should be addressed to some degree. There is...
I mean, because kind of what you're getting... Oh, well, okay, and this is my interpretation. That's why I'm asking, right? Because like I said, this is the woo for me. This is where I get all... I'm not sure about all this shit. Okay, but I've seen the arguments, right? Or I've heard some of them, pieces of them. But this is kind of like this would be like if you were like a subscriber of this ideology versus like standard theology and the belief of creationist and all of this kind of stuff. This is like your backdoor way for a scientist or a physicist to say, okay, well, no, you don't die and go to heaven. Your energy, all your energy functions in your body shut down, so then you're just released back into the quantum entanglement, right? And that kind of isn't that a parallel there somehow?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say yes. I would say there is. Yeah, it's just a different way of looking at. Look, we all die, and we all live, right? And there's a million ways to explain both of those things. This is just one other way,
right,
that they're trying. And it takes scientists a long time, right? Because they have to do all these checks and fact checks and make sure that things are working like they think it is. And plus, there's all this math that they have to use because they can't, in a lot of cases, actually test these situations, right? Until they come up with some clever way of doing so, or someone on the planet does. But I mean, so, you're really working at the edge of science with this sort of thing, right? And you're using a lot of math, and any theory that's pretty math heavy is also pretty theory.
Yeah, heavy. Yeah, theory.
Very theory. But I mean, the thing that amazes me.
So there's a lot of woo in that too.
Yeah, there is. I mean, it's not that much different than I don't know, than someone explaining with a lot of detail how their cosmology works, why they think they live and die, and you can even use this mechanism to make sense of those kind of things too. You can even say, when you were talking about entanglement, the idea is that when these quantum functions occur, they're occurring directly with the thought process, which the thought process is happening on the border between the quantum and the macro, right? So that when this occurs, this is how you store memory, which looks to be stored as a Fibonacci sequence on the microtubules in your brain, right? Which is like the cellular skeleton structure.
You're not saying Fibonacci just because it's a cool word, right? You're talking about like a helical type collapsing.
No, I'm talking about the sequence of numbers, and that if you plot that out on a graph, you would have what they call the golden spiral, right?
Yeah.
So this theory says that when these decisions are made, that this information is encoded in that fashion on the skeleton of cells, the skeletal structure of the cells in the neurons, right? Where all of this energy is interacting with the quantum world through the vibrations of the skeleton of the cells. And that because of that, that's how this information is getting stored, which is also a mechanic inside of this theory that explains how it is you remember things, especially things that you just discover. Right? We're not talking about memory recall, but we're talking about that process that encodes something that happened that looks like it was a variable circumstance thing that happened to you into your mind forever. And that this is how this mechanism works. So it talks about that. And in that process is the idea that the neurons, the cells that make up the neurons of where these are encoded, become entangled.
Quantumly
entangled, yeah. And once something is entangled, and first of all, let me say that we don't actually know what entanglement is. We see it, and we've made it happen, and we've used it.
We can duplicate it. You can test it. You can peer review it. It's a thing.
Yeah, but we have no idea. And when I say no idea, I mean to the point where some people would say that quantum teleportation is what they're using in Star Trek when they beam somebody,
Right.
and that what actually happens is they're making copies of other atoms that are at the location of beam in to be copies of the atoms that they beamed out, and that for an instant there is a duplicate, but one body is destroyed when they beam somebody.
Could you imagine that, man? I'd go get fucking shredded, like peak performance, and then I would just beam a copy of myself new every day.
Well,
you know, so I
yeah.
feel amazing. This is the best me I've ever been. Boom, copy.
and isn't it weird that when you do it in real life, when they do these experiments, they're not sure if the information that is in one atom is being somehow quantumly tunneling to another place and
Right.
changing the atoms there to be like the first one, or if it's that atom itself that's quantumly tunneling to the end location, and that they're not even sure. That's what I'm saying. Like, they don't know if that one atom just went away from one place and ends up in another, or there's actually two that somehow connect it and sharing information faster than the speed of light, which is supposedly impossible.
Right.
Which implies also things like other dimensions, which is when you start talking about the slot theory and how when you're shooting the electrons through the different slots, how sometimes they choose what seems to be random
Explain
patterns.
it right, because that's where they were. Yeah, right. They shoot it. They shoot the electrons. It's a spray pattern of electrons that goes through two slits.
Yeah, and it gives a wave interference
but,
pattern.
But
on the
when it
other
actually
side.
hits on the other side, it seems to create like a picket of
Yeah, which is a wave interference pattern, which makes people, like, the only way you normally get that is if the thing you're shooting isn't just a particle,
Right.
which you just shot.
But there was something
a
big
wave.
that just happened with that whole theory recently,
They
right?
think that happens. They think what it's called is pilot theory, and that it's like more like when you shoot a particle, that what you're doing is you're transferring that energy without shooting it anywhere, and that energy goes into a ribbon. It spreads out into a large location, and that somewhere in that location the energy is higher for whatever reason we don't know than another place, and that it's that place where the highest energy point is where that thing pops back out, right? So that when you shoot these things, they don't just take direct paths. They actually go into a different frequency and spread out through the structure of space-time,
Right.
and end up wherever the structure of space-time happens to be a bit thinner. The energy sinks to that point and pops out there, and that's also kind of how they started talking about things like vacuum energy, that those particles that pop in and out of
which make
nowhere.
which make that electromagnet or that EM pulse drive actually work.
Right, and that's why they were thinking that it was
Because
pilot
at first
theory.
it was like, this thing's breaking the laws of physics here, folks. There's something. This isn't, this shouldn't be doing this. But now it's not. Now that because of that, they're saying that those particles are popping into existence inside that vacuum drive, right? And then popping out.
Yeah.
But that's where it's picking up its inertia from.
Yeah. And people don't know if that's one atom going from, or one subatomic particle going from one place to another.
Right.
Or if that's superposition, it's in both places, or if it's entanglement, it's sharing information with another thing somewhere else, and how one reacts the other does. They're not even sure exactly how that all works, but
The significance of this thing, if for those that aren't aware, this new, it's propulsion without expending a consumable fuel. And for a spacecraft of any type, that's huge. That's a game changer, right? And the article that I read, I think, said that because now they understand how it's actually working, they now understand how the geometry of the enclosure affects it. And they think they can get like a 10, I'm making this up, 10-fold increase in its actual thrusting capability, okay, which is for the same energy.
Yeah.
Okay, so
and anytime you can increase more of something for nothing, that's just brilliant.
Yeah, it's huge.
That's what we want from our scientists. Look, we have nothing. Can you make something out of it? Well, of course I can. Well, can you do more of that? Well, yeah. We're on, man.
It's not something that you're going to build levitation devices out of anytime soon. Well, I say that, but but as we understand it, it's not going to be something that they're going to be building any kind of anti-gravity levitation devices or anything out of.
That's within reach now too.
But with spacecraft that you're like long range space, it doesn't take a whole lot of energy to kind of, hey, I want to nudge you to the right here a little bit because we're going to stick you on a different orbit, 3 years in advance kind of thing. It's a big freaking deal in that case. And just to be able to use electricity or solar, which you can convert with solar energy, right? It's a really interesting proposition. But the point is that so the function, the reason why in physics that engine functions, it kind of harkens back to this whole concept of quantum entanglement and particles popping into and out of existence and things like that, which all kind of, in a strange sort of way, goes back
leads
to this
to entanglement, which leads to the idea that you might be life after death in a theory like orchestrated reduction or orchestrated objective reduction.
Well, but that's what I mean. There's a that sort of supports this too. On the other side of the fence from where artificial intelligence is saying that there's a lot of support for the more complex the algorithm becomes, the more it sort of develops a personality
or even affinity with the universe at large that exists with reality. Like the more complex it becomes, the more integrated it can become with the reality that we have. And of course, those are the concepts of things like OR and stuff, are the concepts that we start talking about when we talk about chemical reactions, because those are one of those boundary levels, like this theory talks about with conscious choice. Chemical reactions, photosynthesis and stuff like that are also on that boundary between the quantum and the macro world. And when we start talking about those chemical reactions, we're talking about that from the idea of psilocybin mushrooms, or any sort of psychedelic substance, right, that might be a bridge between some place other than here, whether that's a quantum level or a metaphysical level, because then of course then we talk about things like religion, but then it feeds back into the idea that the things that your personality in particular, the things that you think or the decisions you make or the things that are you in this variable linear time universe extends on after that, then you're right back in that metaphysical realm again. So yeah, man, it is like scientists being able to jump on board the metaphysics train and be like, hey man, we got some stuff that we can
that's
say
getting
about
to
this.
Be a bit, man, that's getting to be a big deal. I see that there's documentaries and stuff all over Netflix about this now. I see there's a lot of celebrities and stuff that are what was it? She was in the Avatar movies. She was, or in the first Avatar movie, she was the helicopter thingy pilot, where they're going down to South America and doing these retreats and stuff like that. And these people are like supposedly having these like crazy, profound, life altering experiences and stuff. So much so, like I said, that they're putting big money into it and making like a whole documentary about it. I think it's called. We've talked about it before. I always want to call it a Hayabusa, like the motorcycle, but that's not what it's called. What's it called?
I can't remember. It's something like ayahuasca or something.
Ayahuasca. That's it. Yeah, and it's some sort of plant, and there's a brewing. It looks like there's like a brewing process or something to it.
The main component being DMT.
Yes, that's the shit that makes you go talk to the aliens, right?
Right. Yeah. In fact, Sting's biography opens up with him doing that.
Doing the ayahuasca stuff?
Yes.
Like in South America?
Yes.
That's where it's at, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. But that's what's happening. I mean, these people are having these profound, like life-altering experiences, and they're doing that today, right? So if you were some caveman strolling through the Serengeti or whatever, that's probably the wrong place anthropologically, but nonetheless, and you find these, hey, look, these mushrooms look interesting, and the next thing you know, you're communing with the great spirits, as it were. You're
going to remember that.
And I think that there's support for that being a precursor to things like religions and possibly in spiritualism and stuff like that, right? Because didn't the Native Americans, wasn't that part of their process for communing with the great spirit?
They had peyote. And
they used that to enter an altered state, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's just what we know. I mean, when we came over here and basically destroyed them, we didn't ask a lot of questions in a lot of instances. That there were, and before that there were in American Indian culture there was a time when there were a lot of different tribes, and then they sort of got subsumed into, I believe, the 7 main tribes. So in that process, there was probably some culture that was lost as well. But no doubt, if they were using peyote at all, and that's something that we know today so readily, they probably had other substances that they knew about and used, not only for communing with the metaphysical world in terms of psychedelics, but also in medicinal, holistic ways and stuff. When we talked with the Codys, that's one of the things that they still use to great advantage today is that type of information and stuff. And, living now today gives you the luxury of pulling from all of these disparate cultures and stuff, and the different things that they used and what they
Well, they're
used them
certainly
for.
becoming universally cataloged with the internet and the availability of information and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Or
So-
more easily accessed, nonetheless.
And I suppose all religion and science is really just an attempt to help us integrate into reality in some way.
Yeah, but I'm a big fan of the whole science thing.
Yeah.
Because it can be because it can be tested and repeated. You know what I mean? So that's for me personally. I mean, I don't know if anybody gives a shit about this, but I sort of break down on if I can, test it, measure it, these kind of things, then I believe it. But beyond that, it's just woo.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if Orco is more of a spiritual theory or a scientific theory.
Maybe it just is another way to help get people there kind of idea. Because that's where for me, the whole thing just sort of falls apart about not so much about the know and how, but the what. And when we did that podcast where we talked about competitive metaphysics, comparative metaphysics, was that not so much about who the messenger is, but what's the message kind of thing, right? And I find then that these concepts about what you reap, you sow, and that kind of stuff, Orco supports that too. When you think about it in terms of energy, frequency, vibration, how you interact with the physical world, blah, 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 blah. You sort of pick what you put out there in the way that you interact with the universe and the people around you and things like that. So you do have a predetermination in a sense of what kind of effect you want to have, thus what kind of world you want to live in immediately around you.
From the Planck level to the macro level, you do.
And what's trippy about that is, I mean, that's self-help 101. That's like, Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? That's all the same. It's funny. It's a universal tenet. And it wouldn't be surprising if it weren't true, right? But that's all. It's just another way of supporting sort of the same ideology and the same kind of ideals that we just see keep popping up over and over and over and over again.
I feel like we don't know as much. I know that most conventional science would disagree with me, but I feel like we don't know as much about the macro world as we do the quantum world, because, most people are like, yeah, look at all this science we have in physics. All of physics represents the macro world, and we've got that shit down, man. We can calculate some stuff, and it'll happen, right? But the quantum world, we don't know, man. Things are a little uncertain. We're trying to figure it out, and we don't know, right? But when you're looking down to a quantum level, the further down you get to that level, you see there's the mechanisms of the universe.
Right.
The universe came from the small and got bigger, right? And all the mechanisms are small mechanisms. There's not as many large mechanisms.
Yeah.
And what there is of the large mechanisms, we're not really sure about those things. Like, we're not really sure about gravity. We can kind of explain it with the Higgs boson on a quantum level. Isn't that weird? Because we've been using math on a macro level for a long time, but our best explanation for it is on the quantum level. and we're not sure about it. We don't know how it interacts with the quantum level. And then there's things like light when it functions in the macro world. Well, let's just call it waves. Like, let's talk about it in wave functions, right? Even though it's a particle, a quantum, a discrete packet of energy, right? How we understand it quantumly, when it happens in the macro world, we're still forced to consider it in a different way. And even worse, we have to consider it as gravity affects it, which, as I just said, we don't exactly know what that is, right? But it does bend this stuff that we normally consider to be a discrete individual particle, but somehow, like, in our world, it's a big giant wave and it moves around with this other shit. So, like, to me, it seems like we know a lot less about the macro world. And given that in terms of the macro level, that the main things are gravity and light, right? What is all the space for? I mean, I get that whole shrinking down, because as you shrink down, there's all these these constituent components, right? Like, well, you need this for this and this and this, right, in the art world, right? But as you get bigger and bigger, that's a lot of space. And what's it filled up with? Well, light and gravity and some gas. What's it do? It hangs out. It's kind of affected by dark matter and dark energy. Well, what's that? Well, we're not sure. But it seems the whole function. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't seem like you know a lot about it. And what's all the space for?
Yeah.
Right? If you confined our universe to 1 parsec.
Yeah, but
we can still function in every way that we have and evolved in every way we have, right? We really need a giant universe.
And I freely accept that the universe is still full of mysteries, man, but I don't think that they're all woo. I don't think that they're all like...
Well, now they're saying there's going to be 100 times more inhabitable planets in our galaxy alone than they thought.
Okay.
So when you say that you don't think there's going to be found to be any more woos,
woo is in like spiritual, not spirit. What am I trying to like giant gods and lightning bolts and miracles.
What about
and
alien
like
species?
I don't think that that's woo.
Okay.
I just think that I think we may find, if we ever do. You know, we're going down the rabbit hole.
Hey man, the legitimate scientists that are not into all this quantum theory stuff.
No, I dig that.
They're like, hey man, there's a lot of inhabitable planets out there.
Well, I'm not saying I'm into it either. I just find the topic fascinating. You know, the whole thing. I mean, look, it's a theory. It's not an orco or law. It's an orco or theory. It's just some supposition, some people going out and saying, hey, look, there's some kind of interesting support for this.
Definitely. Realistically, planets around other stars that could inhabit life.
The woo to me is like when you start getting into like divine guidance, like that there's some boogeyman or great creature or being in the sky that's watching you 24/7 to judge you for everything you do, and that if you believe hard enough, or that you can make miracles happen and all this, and I'm not saying that any of those things happen. I just don't think that there's any kind of specific deity that makes this shit happen.
Governs the rules too.
Yeah, I think that there's certainly rules with which the universe works. Look, man, okay. This whole concept of of always putting, I'm going to go all hippie on you here, and we're just going to put good energy out into the universe all the time. I don't know why I don't know why my hippie has jazz hands. I'm not sure what that's all about, right? But
because you're throwing your idea at me.
I'm not sure what that is, but apparently my hippie has jazz hands, and I'm just going to put all this positive energy out into the universe, and that's what I'm going to live. The problem, I don't believe that there's any woo to that, because I think what you're also saying is hey, I'm not going to be a douchebag. I'm not going to be an asshole to people. I'm going to be as polite and kind as and when you do those things, there's no specific woo that means that the people in the world would respond to you thus more kindly and better and less, But if you run around, I mean, I've never met, contrary to our United States foreign policy, you don't run around punching everybody in the face to make friends. That does not work, okay? And I don't believe that works personally.
In their defense, they weren't trying to make friends.
Yeah, well, that's what they keep fucking telling us,
I don't think they're trying.
But you know what I mean? Like I don't know that there's any specific woo that has to be a part of that for these kind of concepts to work. I think that they're universal, yes, but I still don't find a deity inside all of this,
right?
Personally.
And I don't either. And as much as I would want to pursue that, and maybe if my brain will let me, we'll get back to it. I have to throw this down on you. So speaking of singularities, which I don't think we were speaking of, but basically singularities are black holes.
So we're going to talk about black holes.
Black holes, okay. Right? Because you can't really talk about light and gravity without mentioning the black hole.
Right.
Basically, a black hole is a star that's collapsed in on itself, that didn't explode like a supernova type 1 or type 2, right? Didn't explode, and it goes and collapses in on itself. It goes to a neutron star, and then it goes even further and becomes what we call a singularity. It's about the size of an atom, about 100,000 times smaller in diameter than the average human hair. And in that space are tons and tons of solar masses, like taking the entire sun and throwing it into the space of an atom. And that's really bad because that warps space. Gravity warps space. If you did not know it, it also warps time, which, that's why you have to have adjustments between the atomic clocks in satellites and on Earth, and things for like GPS and stuff like that. Because the closer you are to a gravity well, the slower time goes. So these runaway collapsation of stars get so bad they become singularities, and they create around them this thing called an event horizon, which is the black hole in and of itself. It's that point at which once you go past it, you can't get back out, light can't escape, and of course it's the definition of the blackness of the hole itself, right? Inside that somewhere is some little atom causing this to happen. And of course everybody knows, if you get too close to a black hole, you get sucked in and you get ripped up and spaghettified and all of that and stuff. Well,
everybody knows that?
A lot of people do, because ever since Einstein and Rosenberg, I think was the guy's name, came up with these ideas.
Oh, the Einstein-Rosenberg bridge.
Yeah, wormholes. That was
That's
for
wormholes.
Yeah,
right.
Ever since this came up, I think this was like in the late 30s, early 40s. This has been in a lot of science fiction shows. So if you're into that sort of thing, I think you know those things about it, right? But what a lot of people didn't know is that implies that information in the universe is going to get lost, that it's going to get sucked into some area that you can't retrieve it from, and even if it existed, it's cut off from you and thus lost, right?
It's the only way you're going to keep your dick pics away from the NSA, right?
Right, yeah.
Irretrievable.
Yeah, it's a great garbage disposal, right? But unfortunately, that violates one of those laws of physics that we talked about earlier, where everyone's like, yeah, we can do so much and figure out so many things, and we can math out stuff, and that stuff will happen.
Right.
It violates one of those big things that allows those things to happen and hold true under certain circumstances like this. At any rate, that was a problem. And the brilliant Stephen Hawking came up with the idea that this information would evaporate outside of the black hole, that the event horizon would shrink as this information evaporated, and that it would be released back into the universe as what he called Hawking radiation, right, which solved the problem. But there were some issues with the math of this, right? Like the math didn't really work out, because ultimately at the end of the day, the whole idea is once you're past this terminus boundary, nothing comes back out. Leonard Susskind comes in, and Kip Thorne, and Stephen Hawking have what's called the black hole wars. And essentially, these wars are about the preservation of information.
Fight, right?
Yeah. But when they fight, the prize was a year's subscription to Playboy magazine.
Oh, so it was all on the line, man. I mean,
yeah.
It was do or die.
That's what the bet was between the three of them.
You're kidding me, really?
No, that's the absolute truth. They were determined between the three of these people. Kip Thorne is also another big guy in physics, especially concerning black holes and things like that. And whoever came up with apparently the best theory about where this information goes and how it works and still is preserved is going to win the bet, and they're going to get a 1-year subscription to Playboy magazine. So, all accolades aside from publishing the paper that explains these things, right? So they go at it, and eventually Susskind wins the war, and his his idea was,
I mean, wins as in then the other two said, nope, you're probably right.
Everybody who looks at the math and the idea says this is the most reasonable and sound explanation for what we can observe and what we see, and for the other math around it, and also explains how information is not lost. Like, so the main thing is that they have to explain that information is not lost, but the idea is that everybody submits to this idea as being the best idea. So he wins in that sense. And his idea essentially was that the event horizon is not a boundary in a black hole where once something passes, it can't escape from. What it is, it's the space around the gravitational anomaly where time has absolutely come to a standstill, where time has slowed down so much that it's not moving. And so as you're drawn, or information is drawn into the event horizon area, it gets imprinted in 2 dimensions. It loses its 3rd dimensional quality due to the gravitation and gets stored 2-dimensionally on the outside surface of the event horizon. And is in effect is not lost out of our universe.
It's just like in some sort of weird state of suspension.
Yeah. And the main way that this was proven was that you can prove mathematically that any information it takes to make a 3-dimensional object can be done in 2 dimensions.
Okay.
So that if you convert anything into 2 dimensions, you don't lose any of the information. That was like the main principle behind this happening. So that idea, and because of its acceptance academically, is what gave rise to the holographic universe principle. The idea that we are living in is a simulation ran by a god or some ancient aliens or something of that nature, that our whole reality is a simulation.
See, there it goes again. It's got to break down into the woo every freaking time.
Well, that's why I said I'm going to go here. You said that wasn't woo. I'm like, well, let's try this. Maybe this will be a woo factor, right? And so this idea comes up that, in fact, we could be living in a projected universe. And another thing that lends credence to this is the largeness of our apparent universe. Like, it's so huge that we technically don't really know what lies beyond the Hubble view. We don't know how far it stretches or what the general shape of it even is. We don't know if it's egg-shaped or round or a saddle-shaped, right? We just don't know, right? And if we look at it, any part of it, too closely, it pixelates out.
Right.
And we don't know what's happened. It just kind of goes away and doesn't make any sense, right? Just like a simulation would. If you look too close at it, or a picture on your computer, if you just get too close, you're not going to see more detail, more insight. You're not going to reveal more mysteries. You're just going to get to a point where nothing makes sense because you're breaking through the simulation into another reality, right?
Isn't that the whole kind of point of the electron collider, though, is to break them down into smaller constituent components so they can
not
kind of
for that
measure it?
reason, but yeah, essentially they're smashing atoms apart to break them into their gluons and their W and Z subatomic particles and all that, and they're trying to take pictures of those subatomic particles before they actually reconnect and make other atomic particles, because a lot of them, they can't stay in that state for any length of time. And the last time that they were freed from those states was at early times in the universe when the Big Bang happened and everything was really hot, right? And nothing could stay together. As the universe cooled, the stuff started gluing itself together, and we end up with our 4 forces. But they suspect that way back at the beginning of time that the 4 forces was like one super force altogether, the weak, strong electro and gravitational force.
Yeah, man, it's interesting that there's all of these different preset or different sort of new theories that are emerging about what reality is, you know, and what existence actually means, and consciousness, and all this kind of interesting.
What is existence, and what can you do with it?
What do you think that is, though? Because it's true that there seems to be an emergence of Eastern religions and those kind of things now. Seem to like yoga and all of this kind of stuff is really booming. Definitely in the English speaking world, but Do you think, why is that? Why is that happening now? Do you think it has anything to do with like the information age, or?
I don't know.
It's kind of weird, right?
Well, I didn't know that was coming back. Like, I didn't know. So.
Well, I don't know that it's okay. It's not really coming back per se. It's just that it's becoming bigger than ever, and it seems to be growing like crazy.
I don't know, maybe it's maybe it works. I mean, I haven't done it personally, right? So maybe people find out that it's very beneficial, and they tell other people. And so in that sense, I guess, when we talk about the information age and all of that, word gets around, right? If something didn't have a benefit, it seems unlikely that a lot of people would do it because the word would be out, right? This is dumb. This doesn't help, right? So the fact that something is sustainable in a modern time like this is almost indicative of the idea that it has some sort of use, because otherwise, either way, word gets around, right? And people know, that helped me. I have had a lot of people tell me here of late that I should do yoga for various things. Yeah. So in that sense, I guess I've been awakened to the idea that, and also with some of the guests that we've interviewed and stuff, like it has been brought to my attention more so now than in the past, but I guess it is because of media technology, because that's how I encountered most of that information.
Yeah, and I'm not even just talking about just the physical act of practicing yoga, right? Because there's that definitely. The like exercise, but then the whole studying the philosophy behind it and stuff too. I see a lot more people embracing that primarily, as like their primary sort of, I guess it'd be a religion for them and things like that. But yeah, there's a what do you call it? A place where they do Tai Chi and yoga and all that kind of stuff in town, but they have a flotation tank. I'm doing that, man.
Yeah, you have to let me know. I'll sit here and watch Altered States while you do it. And when you come home, I'll be like, hey, how'd it go?
I could come home a complete Neanderthal.
Yeah,
I could revert.
Banging on the hallway walls.
Because that's my only experience, other than hearing about it a lot in other podcasts and things like that. But I've always... when I found out they had, I was like, ooh, I'm going to go do that. I'm going to try that at least once. I'm going to see what it's like.
Jeff Bridges?
It was, yeah.
I thought so.
Yeah, but that was that movie Altered States, right? I think they were taking LSD and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
It wasn't just... Hey,
and we've discussed how essential it is that helps you bridge the metaphysical gap. All of these techniques, that's no different than sweat lodges that Indians would use and stuff like that, or fasting. There's various things. So a sensory deprivation tank, an anabolic chamber, which totally deadens sound, is another one of those devices. So devices like that, sweat lodges and stuff, and certain psychotropic substances, these are all things, DMT and stuff, that helps bridge those two things if you don't want to approach it purely from an academic point of view with things like OR, which sometimes when I'm reading about feels like I had some sort of a psychotropic substance, and now all these words are really strange. Like, why are these words? Why am I reading these words? What do these words mean? And they all have weird meanings too.
It's definitely something you're fascinated. I just like the way that it ties. It's an interesting theory that ties together like physics and some of the woo in the world, and it kind of says, well, look, here's a theory in biology and chemistry and all this, and kind of gives a real interesting way of putting it all together. I find it as plausible as anything else.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
absolutely.
And at least as plausible as anything else.
Yeah.
When it comes to things like religions and dogmas and stuff like that, for sure. But we do definitely share a love of physics, but we share a love of physics for a whole entirely a different reason. And that reason being, you and I both enjoy watching people wreck themselves in videos on the internet, right?
Oh, God, yeah.
I mean, is that not the weirdest guilty pleasure in the world?
I don't feel guilty at all when I watch an hour and a half of people getting ran over by bulls. I laugh so hard. Man, everybody thinks that they're slick until the bull runs them over, and then they seem a bit dazed. Like, wow, man, what's going on? Am I in Spain? That's weird. Yeah, then they get hit again.
And the people that I call them curb squirrels. Like the skateboarders and the bicyclists and stuff. And man, some of them dudes do amazing shit, right? But it's funny when you see that they've gotten so comfortable with what they do that they forget how much energy and momentum and stuff is at play until they do something stupid.
They look totally relaxed and right when they hit the wall or the ground, they still looked like they were relaxed and they weren't expecting it.
Yeah, like the bike falls in half and that kind of stuff. But yeah, man, I get a sick sense of pleasure out of watching people wreck themselves. And one of my favorite things is those that Japanese, I think it's Japanese, it could be Korean, but it's a game show that they overdubbed in the United States called Most Extreme Eliminations or something like MXE, and those poor bastards getting folded in half and shit.
I like the sports things, or the skateboards and stuff like that too, but the thing I like absolutely the most is when
it's against Mother Nature or something like that.
Yeah.
So you just should not be messing with this, right?
Right, yeah. Like you should know better, and you don't. And you think you've got the upper hand on everything, including life.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's weird, man. People do that. There's been 2 or 3 parkour people who've plummeted.
To their death.
Yeah, like stories to their death,
It's sad.
I don't know if it is or not. I don't know.
It's sad for their families.
Probably, yeah, I guess. I don't know, man. I mean, like, I can't even
Some
get
of that
to
shit,
doing
dude.
that the first place, man. I don't know how you. I was like, man, I don't even know how you do it. I don't even know how you get there.
I hate that when someone on Facebook will be like, "Oh, check out this cool video," and it's some dude like hanging off of a tower, like a radio tower
Freaks
and stuff
me
like
out
that.
right
And I'm
then
like,
and there.
I hate those videos. I'm like, I don't even want to watch this.
Ding, 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 ding. You said the words.
Yeah.
Radio tower.
Yeah.
That's the magic word. Now let's talk about number stations.
You want to talk about number stations?
Well, I wanted to mention number stations.
All right.
You guys got to check out number stations. Number stations are generally shortwave radio station broadcasts that have been broadcasting since World War I, not before, and still to this day. And typically, they are constantly broadcasting the same message over and over and over again. Typically, it is a woman, but sometimes it can be a man or a child or some other thing. And typically, they're repeating a series of numbers over and over and over again. But it can, again, be some other thing like just a sound or a phrase. They have them in almost every country, and nobody knows what they are.
Like, huh?
Well, which part does the hum go to?
Is this like some weird X-Files shit? I mean,
It can be if you look at things in that light, I suppose. I mean, nobody knows what they are. No.
Is this a for real thing?
Yeah. Yeah, you can find it on shortwave radio. You can. There's also the Cohen Project, which is a DVD that you can get that has a whole bunch of examples of these things that have been recorded and stuff.
Well, no, wait a minute. Okay, so I was in the Navy. I was an avionics technician, so I worked on the radios and all that stuff that goes into aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a reasonable understanding of how radio waves travel and things like that. If there was a transmitter, you could find it.
That you can. They have.
So, well then...
They're on government property, and people aren't allowed in.
They're like on... Huh? Really?
Yeah, every government has one.
Every
Or
government
more.
has, and it's just...
It's just a radio station that broadcasts a specific message over and over and over again. Now, there have been times that these messages have changed, and they seem to coincide with political events.
Okay.
Like when there was a coup in Russia, there was changes to their number stations. They call them number stations because most of the times it's just somebody repeating numbers. Like for instance, one recording might be of a woman saying something like 799432, 799432. 7, and it will just go over and over and over for months.
All right, you got to find one of these.
I can. I don't have any shortwave radio stuff. I don't know.
Okay, if they're out there, they'll be on YouTube or something like that, right?
I suppose so.
Yeah, see if you can find one on. See if you can find one. I want to hear this.
Okay, I got CDs. If you want to wait, I can go and get a CD, and actually we can plug it into the board.
No, just see if you can find it on YouTube.
Okay.
That way, if someone's listening to this,
they can find it on YouTube.
They can find it themselves, you know. Like if
we'll
anybody's listening
project.
to this, if anybody's still listening to this podcast,
get the Cohen Project. That's like a 4 CD set of examples that are the insert has like all of the information and all that. So, but let me see if I can find one.
So this is some like real conspiracy theory type shit here that actually exists, and there's like a group of people that are pursuing and researching this thing, right? It's kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah. So I've got some here. How you want to hook me in, or want me? Where's the hook in?
It's right there.
Oh, okay.
It's the same one we use when everybody calls in.
This is the first time I've been here, man.
I guess.
They said I was a good actor.
I guess. So you're good to go.
Let's see. Let's go with. So here's one labeled creepy. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't hear myself.
You dig something up.
I did. So, creepy number station, 14,873 megahertz. And an advertisement.
I don't know. There it goes. Sounds like he's saying 1.8.
Here's another one. I can't hear anything.
This one's just beeping.
Well, this is an hour worth, so hold on. Let me go to another one. Here's another one. Here's another one. See, most of these are shortwave, so.
So the sound quality is kind of shit, yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is, what you're hearing,
yeah,
you can hear this going on for months and months on this particular station, like all the time, rarely changing and seemingly only to coincide with big political events.
5, 7, 6, 4, 1, 6, 4, 2, 6, 2, 6, 4, 2, 6, 2, 7, 4, 2, 6, 0, 7, 4.
I've used some of these recordings in my music.
Oh, you sampled them?
Yeah.
5, 2, 6.
All right, so it's in Spanish.
Yeah. You find them in almost every country. So they're in every country, and what people think that they are
All right, yeah, give us the X-Files breakdown on this. I mean, what are the theories about what these things are?
What people think that they
Assuming
are?
that, so you're saying that anybody with a shortwave radio and close enough to one of these transmitters should be able to dial into this.
Really
and be able to
anywhere in
find
the
these,
world
right?
because of the way shortwave works, right?
Yeah.
So anywhere. And they can. And what the best idea of what these are is that they're specific codes that are applicable to only like one or two people that have the code book, right? So they call it like a one-way code or a one-time code or something like that, right? It's not based upon some algorithm or anything that you could crack. Like it's specific, and that only the people who know what it is know what it means, right? So it's only a few people. So they think it's part of a spy network.
But it's all around the world.
Well, all around the world and with every country.
Strange.
Yeah. But it may not be that. It could be something else. This is just when people have thought about it, they figure that the only thing it could be is for spies from a particular country to tune in to see if anything particular happens.
But
I don't know.
You say these transmitters are all located on government property.
Well, the ones they've tracked, yeah, they've been located in places that have like fences and barriers around them, or guards and stuff, or in some cases are inside of embassies.
Weird.
Yeah, where you don't have no jurisdiction. So I don't know, man.
It does kind of make sense that it's like some universal way to, like you said, like if you had the book that went with it, you can listen to the number sequence and it can kind of reference something that tells you, hey, we're all clear right now, or what, whatever. Maybe that there's some sort of, but you would have to have a book to understand what that is, right? That kind of connects the whole thing together.
Right. And it wouldn't be something that you could learn. It wouldn't be a code that you could learn. It would have to be something specific, like you said, in a book, right? So that's what they figure. They figure that, I don't know, that the code's unbreakable, I guess, and that they need somebody to go out and be extremely covert, where they only got one-way communication, where they can't reply back, that they're instructed to tune in at these times of question to listen to this particular frequency on a shortwave radio, and as long as this one message is going on, everything's cool. Carry about your business, stay underneath. Don't reveal yourself as a spy. Don't do any spy stuff.
Right.
Just be a citizen until this code changes, and then all of a sudden the sleeper awakens, and now there's a spy in your midst. I mean, that's kind of like the dark worry I think that people have.
It's trippy.
It is now.
Well, yeah, right. I didn't know these things existed.
Most people
wild.
don't. Yeah, it's weird, man. It's like Hawkwind and number stations. People don't know those two things exist. I don't know why. They're all over the place.
Wait. Whoa. Time out. I know why a lot of people don't know Hawkwind exists, because generally the first time they've heard it, they went, I'm not listening to that anymore. Okay, it's not for everybody. Okay, you can't just put both of those things in the same space. That's not fair. That's not fair to number stations. Ugh. But no, I never knew about this. So this is like a real fucking thing. This is something that because not a lot of people are into shortwave radio anymore. I think my neighbor is, and I think that's why I get so much noise on my guitar all the time.
Maybe he's just a spy.
Or maybe, right?
Who knows how many spies have lived and died as citizens who never got the call to do anything until the right moment.
Well,
God, that's a bad thing to say in our current political climate.
No, I think that, first of all, what's far worse than that isn't that, okay, it isn't how many lived and died, it's how many that were never even called, or primarily were never caught, that we never even knew existed to begin with.
The whole living and dying to me implies like this has been going on since World War I.
I did this, I looked this up, this is kind of a side thing here, but I looked this up the other day. God, I'm going to make these numbers up, but I swear it was something like, in the United States, it's sick, somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% of reported violent crimes go unsolved. Or maybe no, it was 60% of reported property crimes go unsolved, and like almost half of reported violent crimes go unsolved. So it's kind of a thing in the U.S., right? It's not because you don't know, and that's a guess about what they think is. No one really knows how much shit happens that's never even reported.
Yeah.
Okay. There's that whole X factor there, but. When you talk about things like that, how few people are actually caught and prosecuted to begin with, is astounding. It's insane.
Another worry, if people don't have enough, is that Illuminati worry. In other words,
oh man, we're going deep in the conspiracy theories today.
Well, I mean, it's number stations, right? Nobody knows what they are, and they're very modern. Like and the fact that so many nations have them goes beyond almost the idea that it is a spy network, right? Because if everybody has access to the same thing, it's almost like an arms race where it's almost equal, right? So you don't really need to fear it, because the implication is we've got as many sleepers in their territory as they do ours, because we're both using these same techniques, right? The worst implication to me is that there's a level above that's the Illuminati level, that's connecting these nations together, right? That it's information for them.
The grand conspiracy.
Yeah. That's the worst worry, right? Because everybody acknowledges that these things are here and they're happening, and there's actually been some people quoted that said something to the effect, if I just read it, in fact, it's like, oh no, these things are exactly what you think they are. That's what they said. That's what the official said. Like, God, that doesn't sound good, because we're thinking all kinds of bad things.
Yeah, right. Right.
So, but I mean,
it does make sense, though, that they would serve a really utilitarian, practical purpose like that, and it's probably nothing more than that.
Yeah.
But if you didn't have the code book on the other end, and then if you ever got exposed, you would just you resequence the code book, so to speak,
or
and then
so
redistribute it
to
the people that weren't compromised, and then change the number sequence.
But
right?
if it's like the Illuminati people, man, it may not even be that many code books out there. It might even be something that you just get taught, and when you're initiated, like every Rothschild family member has to know the secret language, right? Because it's being broadcast on our personal thing. And wherever you're at in the world, you can tune in and figure it out. You don't have anything on you. That's crazy. Okay. Anyway, that was fun.
Good Lord, man.
That's why they don't have to have secret handshakes
anymore, right?
Yeah, they're all broadcasted into the same thing.
No, you just have to have a shortwave radio and an antenna big enough to pick it up. Okay, which is not really practical anymore. So,
but could be subdermal now.
A shortwave radio?
Well, they can do it with normal types of radios, like FM frequencies and stuff.
Well, no, there becomes a physical limitation to things, man, based on like how large your antenna is. Your antenna.
What about money, though?
Because listen. Listen, all right. I did a bunch of work back early on when this RFID stuff was going to start hitting big.
Uh-huh.
And there was a big box store that everybody knows the name of, okay, that has its own web series called The People Of, right, where you get real interesting photos of people wearing clothes that they shouldn't be wearing in shopping late at night or whatever. But so one of the mandates that they had come down with early on was that every supplier was going to have to include this RFID technology in their products. So the best way to understand that, right, is that, on the side of every product, there's that barcode. Okay. And that's how they do it now. And every product that ever gets released has a unique identifier. Okay, or should. You can make your own, but should have a unique identifier, like a global unique identifier, okay? so that there's like one common database for all of these merchants and stuff that they can use to always be able to sell any product they want. You just need this database, right? So, but this concept when the RFID, the radio frequency identification system, came out, the concept was that you were going to be able to do away with that need to pass that item one at a time across these scanners.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was a radio frequency, so the way these things work is they don't have a battery or anything in them. Okay, you bombard them with energy, so you have to transmit a signal to them. They collect the energy literally from that radio signal and are able then to excite the electronics to respond and give you a response of, hey, here's my number. Okay,
and it's usually about a 20-meter radius that would be in, right?
No, man, it's far less than that. That's the big problem with it, okay? Because the concept was, man, this will be great because then we can just make these scanners that you could literally just like, gonna ring my shopping cart up, push it through, the scanner would bombard it, all those things would pop back, say, this, it would ring you up, and then the cart would pop out the other side, and everything in the cart instantly or very quickly would be rung up. And then the idea was also when you're doing inventory, so they were thinking, well, we'll just build these things around the docks of our truck docks. So when our fork truck driver goes in, grabs a pallet, when he backs through, it automatically takes all of those items and puts them into our warehouse now as received into our inventory.
Sounds good.
Okay, yeah, it sounds fantastic. The problem with it becomes that its retransmit ability, because its primary energy source is from the radio frequency that you hit it with to begin with, okay? So that's where it collects its energy from. So when it transmits back, it doesn't have a whole hell of a lot of power. So when you have like really dense products that are packed, and then let's say you're doing sodas, okay, that's a liquid. So that's going to have an attenuation factor for that radio signal, both coming to the RFID tag and then responding back. So the problem with them became that you had to make the antenna on them so damn big, even though it was like this flat sticker thing, that there are a lot of products that it's way bigger than the product, okay? And then they couldn't get the cost of them down enough. They got them down to like pennies, okay, like less than 17 cents a piece or something like that. But in the scale that you're talking about, hundreds of millions of products and stuff being shipped, sold, that starts to incur a significant cost with not a whole hell of a lot of payback. So it's funny that when I went through this whole mess, right, with this RFID and all this kind of stuff, that it was going to be this whole revolutionary thing and everybody was going to have to abide by it. And the whole thing fell apart within like 5 years. But some of the industries, like I'm a programmer, we were sort of getting ready for it ahead of time because we figured we were going to be integrating those devices into like warehouse systems and stuff like that. So what the hell was the point? We were talking about
how feasible it would be if you could
shortwave radio. Yeah.
Subdermally.
Yeah, you can't. That's my point. It's like there starts to become a point where with attenuation and the size of antennas, you could, but you'd have a big antenna sticking up out of your shoulder or something,
I agree with all of that, but
or you'd have to be really close to the transmitter.
We both know that the Rothschilds are using alien technology that was crashed in 1945 and the Roswell Desert. They got access to that, of course.
Now tell me how the moon landings were fake too while you're at it.
Faked? Right? That's just one of the many things that was fake. This whole reality is fake.
Jesus Christ.
We're living in a hologram. You don't know how fake the moon landing was.
What got you so fired up for conspiracy theories
I don't know.
Tonight,
it's silly. It's just one of those things. Like there's no end to it.
I didn't know if like something happened. Did you have a conversation with somebody?
No. I was just thinking of number stations, and I was just started thinking about how insidious somebody could look at that, and how you can extrapolate that into these things, and just having some fun with that. It's nothing I worry about. I don't worry about any of these things. In fact, I spent the most time just a few minutes ago thinking about these things than I normally ever do.
Boy, if there is a grand cabal, I don't think it's working real well.
Yeah, well,
Okay. I don't.
when I think of number stations, I end up thinking of Lost, the television series.
Conspiracy theorists be like, because that's what they want it to be like. They don't want you thinking that they're in charge right now or some shit, right?
Yeah, you never
No matter
know.
what you say, you can't win.
No. And I mean, I'm not saying even that it wouldn't be that way. I mean, I don't have any evidence of that. I don't know anything about it. And what I know about, I'm already speculating about right here. So that's about as far as I know about or think about it. I mean, if it was half of the things I thought it was, it wouldn't apply to me and I couldn't access it anyway.
One of the things that struck me was after the last election, and I don't even want to get into politics, man, but for so long I heard how, because here's the conspiracies, was that, Obama was a foreign agent because he didn't have a valid birth certificate, right? And eventually everybody was going to be, so I don't know how this was all going to happen, by the way, but eventually everybody was going to be locked up in FEMA camps and all this kind of stuff, right?
I remember that stuff going around.
And there was going to be a false flag event right before the election so they could declare. And this is all shit I legitimately heard from people. Okay, I'm not even making this up.
It.
Okay, there was going to be a false flag event that was going to give the government some form of martial law, and Obama was going to stay president forever. And then when our current president got into the mix, right, it was, the Grants conspiracy then became that Hillary Clinton was already predetermined to win the election, that there was no point. There's all these people behind the green curtains, pulling the real levers and all this kind of stuff. And then when Donald Trump won, I called one of my buddies and I was like, hey, who's going to eat all those fucking MREs you have, man? Because everything that, one of these people that are real pro and a prepper and all of this kind of stuff, right? And I was like, because everything you said was going to happen didn't. Nobody's in FEMA camps. Nobody took anybody's guns. Hillary Clinton didn't win the election. And you've got, 8 months worth of fucking MREs. What are you going to do with all that now?
It's always coming, man. It don't matter. The planets are all going to align, and the gravitation is going to pull everything apart.
And Nibiru's going
to show up. If
right?
that doesn't happen, and kill everybody. If that doesn't happen, Y2K will occur.
Well, there's a new one. The Bible says that the world's going to end June of 2018.
Yeah, that's going to happen. It's all these things, man, they've been going on forever. There's been prophecies of end times since the dominant Christian flavor of the apocalyptic idea of.
Well, that's not just that's Abrahamic.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, like ever since that has happened, that's been a theme.
Abrahamic, I think is the way to say that.
There's description in ancient Roman history of people who got together who thought that the world was going to end, and they were out like in the wilderness waiting for their tokens of deliverance, is what they say in those writings, and the Romans would come out there and just kill them all because they were
they went out there to find God.
Well,
the Romans helped.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
At this point, yeah, but at this point in their society, though, they really had this, they had like a deified emperor, and anybody who was preaching that there was a higher order or a higher divinity or anything like that within their territory, they stomped that stuff out pretty quick.
They didn't like that crap.
They didn't. No, that was just part of their policy of handling the provinces.
Yeah, boy, if there was ever a historical marker to point at that punishment does little to nothing to stop behavior,
yeah,
it would have to be the Romans, man, because they were efficient about killing people, and it didn't work.
No,
it just, I mean, how many thousands and thousands of people were crucified for just being Christians?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they were good at that shit. They would line entire roads with crucified people.
Well, they did
that didn't work.
They did that for a particular event, for a fire that was blamed on the Christians, and I think it was either Caligula or Nero.
Oh, it was
I
one
think
of
it was
the original
Caligula.
air quote false flag events, right? Too,
Well, yeah.
to boot, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Theorized.
Yeah. So yeah, but people do. In fact, I think that probably an example, a really good example of that from that particular time period, was there was a Roman general who was put in charge of a province, and there was a letter from him to the emperor where he was saying he was having a hard time dealing with Christians, because when they would talk to them, they would bring them in and they would ask them to repent, essentially, and accept the Roman emperor as the divinity, and they would always refuse, right? Like and the process was they gave them 3 attempts, and at 3 attempts they would send them off to be ate by the lions or whatever. And like, I guess none of these people relented. Like, it was just common that they would be like, nope, to the death. And he was so worried about it because he was worried that there would be a religious rebellion,
Right, sure.
if he just kept killing them, right? And so
Right.
he's like writing to the emperor, and it's like, everything's going pretty well, other than these Christians, man. Like, they're pretty diehard, and they're pretty much just going to their deaths with what they're saying. So you want me to keep killing them, kind of a thing, like.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
And they did, but that's
Yeah, and they did. They're like, yeah.
But now and you think, okay, well, punishment stops behavior. The Roman Catholic Church is now in Rome, and a place where they were like crucifying these people, like
Still believing it, yeah.
yeah, like it was going out of style. So I always find that odd that that people can't even look at that and realize, okay, well, wait a minute, you can't punish people out of behavior. You got to do something different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the whole idea of martyrism, I suppose. The whole idea that could even be a thing has to be reliant upon somebody being willing to take something to the most extreme measures,
Right.
which would be the ending of their life, presumably.
Wow. What people are willing to do for an ideology, huh?
Yeah.
And they were, boy, is that a testament of faith or conviction for your faith? This is yep, go ahead and kill me.
I think most people would, dude. I think that most people, whatever their ideology is, for some people it's simple things like wanting their individual freedom or their freedom on their property or whatever it is, and some people want universal love or whatever it is, but everybody's kind of got those levels, I think, where they would die for, I certainly can think
It's definitely necessary for some reason as part of the human condition, it seems like, because it goes through antiquity.
Yeah.
That people were like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think inscribed on the temple of Apollo is the words, "Know thyself." I know it's like a Shakespeare quote, but essentially that's from the Greeks. They and what they meant by it was the whole concept of arte, urbis, and nemesis. They, to know your place in a sense, which doesn't mean always not getting a big head about you and thinking you're better than everyone else.
Right.
It also means not being a sloth and not rising up to your natural abilities of what you can do for other people and yourself. But the Greek people, the original meaning to the word sin, the Greek word for them, sin, was missing the mark. That's what it originally meant. The word sin is a Greek word, and it originally meant missing the mark. So it was a sin for you to either have a head full of erebus, where you thought you were better than the gods. Hubris, yeah. Better than the gods or better than everybody else. But it was just as much of a sin to not rise up to your natural potential,
Right. Yeah. But it's the same thing. I was just thinking about this when you were talking with like all the people that we've had on the show now and we've interviewed and we've talked to. It was really interesting finding that they all, at some level, adhere to kind of the same personal habits, personal drive, personal, fundamentals. It's all the same, amongst all of them, right? So that commitment to, whether it's a commitment to a faith or commitment to an art or commitment to, it's all this, it all seems to come from the same well.
Well,
It's what I mean by it's part of the human condition, it seems like.
Yeah, and I think that the artists are the people who have a commitment to the self, that tend to explore the inner self and that connection to the metaphysical, and in whatever way they do it. I mean, it can literally be anything from painting, sculpting, to writing short stories, or, it can even be expressed in gaming and things of that nature. It started raining here in Ohio.
You've been writing a lot of music for people here lately.
I don't know if I'd say a lot. I wrote a couple of things. That's about it so far. I'm working on something now, but then I wasn't happy with it, so I stopped. And then started something new, and it's so new I don't even know. So
yeah, I've been getting the bug lately too. Been doing some orchestration and stuff like that, and playing more again. I don't know what it is. Summer's coming, I guess.
I have very little control over. I try to set out writing specific things, but it just goes where it
doesn't
goes
really
a lot
work
of
that way,
times.
does it?
No.
It's hard. It's hard.
It is, yeah. It's one thing to write music. It's a totally different thing to write a song.
It's people that actually do composition for like TV commercials and things like that. That's a special talent, because it's not the same as just being the kind of loose creative process where you just sort of keep putting stuff together. And go,
Yeah, they got to
man,
put
that
things
sounds
in
kind of good.
30-second increments.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely kind of its own specialized sort of field. I can't do it. I can't. I about as far as I can get is if it's in minor, it's sad. If it's in major, it's happy. That's about as far as I get, and then whatever happens after that.
Well, like Paul Robb said, though, keep writing. That's the main thing you can do to continue to improve.
It's so freaking easy
Just
today,
keep writing.
man.
Yeah,
I just do it all on my cell phone. I literally do everything in GarageBand on my iPhone.
They make it easy today. There's a lot of free apps and stuff or low cost apps and stuff, and of course there's low-cost dolls and stuff, too, that are professional dolls.
Like Reaper, like the one we use for the podcast.
Yep.
It's amazing.
Yep.
Killer doll, man.
A lot of free tutorials out there for people for using almost any kind of doll. There's a tutorial for that. There's tutorials for plugins, for everything, man. Like for mastering or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a lot out there. If you got the equipment and you've got the time to mess with it yourself, you can learn stuff yourself. You can read the PDF files that come with almost every piece of software. I mean, what's one good thing is to understand the software you're using and why it was made, to know why it's supposed to be an improvement or a different thing than what you would normally do with this type of effect or something.
It's funny because you and I have met in the middle. Because you started with the higher end PC-based software as your medium for which you kind of got into doing composition and recording, right? And I started with GarageBand on my iPhone.
But with an acoustic instrument.
With an acoustic instrument, right.
Which makes a huge difference,
And now both of us use Reaper. You
Yeah.
moved away. What was some of the ones you used?
I had only used Acid Pro.
Acid Pro, that was the
Yeah.
one, yeah. Which was more like everybody kept telling you, isn't it like looping software?
Yeah, or almost not. I mean, I think it was like one of those borderline professional things. It started off not being that, but got better as time went by.
Right.
It ended up doing a lot of the things the other ones did, but a lot of people didn't use it. It wasn't really considered to be professional, I don't think.
You're full time. You do everything in Reaper now, don't you?
Yeah, I don't use Acid anymore.
Yeah.
Reaper is like 10 times better.
Man, if you want to get into this though, an iRig, which is a device that we actually use it on the podcast. It's how we plug our cell phones into the mixing board so that we can put callers and sound bites and stuff into the podcast. But you can get these iRigs for they make different versions of it, but I think they're anywhere from in the $20-some range up into the $100+ range. But it's just a device that allows you to plug an analog instrument like a guitar chord into your phone, so you can sample your guitar. And then in the GarageBand software, they give you like a pretty good assortment of amp models and things like that you can use to change the tone of your guitar from distortions to. So I mean, seriously, I think GarageBand is in the iTunes store. I think is under $5. I think it's like $4.99, and then the iRig you can get for like $20-some for literally like $25-$30, you can be recording, multi-track recording, and with all kinds of great I love Garageband. I go, hey, I want a drummer. I just pick my drummer, beats per minute, style I want him to play, move some sliders around. Yep, there's the sound I want. Nowhere near as good as a real drummer, mind you. I'm not saying that, but for the purposes of building composition and things like that, the way that the instruments and stuff work in it that allow you to record.
Very quick.
Very
efficient.
quick, yeah. So if you've got a basic, fundamental understanding of okay, I want my song to be a 1-4-5 chord progression, man, and 4 beats per measure, and so I'm going to do 16 measures, and then I want to loop that. You can put a song together in minutes.
Yeah.
It's
It's
amazing.
a great sketch pad.
Yeah, exactly. Then they got this thing oh man, I can't remember what it's called. Music Memo. And this thing is really freaking cool. So same thing, you can use an iRig or you can just use your phone's microphone, right? But you just okay, you're strumming around on your guitar or whatever, and you come up with an idea and I want to get this recorded. You hit this Music Memo thing, you just hit record and you play the part. Okay, then it transcribes it for you, tells you what key it's in, all the chords, everything. It tells you all the music notation for it, right? Mm-hmm. Then you can kind of go in and quick edit it, take the dead space in the beginning and the end out, and then you can add it'll generate a bass line and a drum track
Is it a self-contained unit?
Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna say
it's really
has
slick.
a thing like this too called Spire. And it's the same thing. It's like a self-contained unit where you can plug in your microphones, your keyboard, or whatever.
Once you do this, though, you can export it and import it right straight into GarageBand.
Yeah,
that's the other thing that's really cool about it, right? So there's just if people took the time to understand, even spend some time learning the tools that are just available. If you want to do music composition, okay, but you don't have to really even have any kind of special ability or special knowledge when it comes to music theory, because you can set it's real easy, but you can in it you can, first of all, you tell it what key that you're composing in, okay, and then you tell it whether I'm going to compose in minor.
Well, see, I think that you definitely would have to have some knowledge.
Well, no,
if you're going to utilize those things correctly.
It's 2 selections, one of which is predetermined for you, because it can't create a song without creating in a key. I think the default key is C.
Yeah.
All right, so you change that, and then, but there's this other selection. Once you figure out this one magic selection, what it does is it makes it so that you can't play any wrong notes, because it takes all the wrong notes for a key and a mode completely out of the equation. It takes them off the screen. So I call it, the playing with your face kind of thing. You can just kind of take it and just slide your face around on it. You can't hit a wrong note. And they're starting to incorporate this stuff in lighted keyboards and stuff now. Yep. And digital keyboards. But this is something
and chords too.
Yeah, and chords, right? Yeah. So it's like baked into it. So you don't. That's what I mean. You don't necessarily. If you knew how to use the software, the software keeps you from making mistakes that you would make in music theory.
Yeah.
Because it just takes those mistakes, the possibility of those mistakes away.
Yeah.
It's really cool shit, man.
It definitely opens up the ability for the average person to make music.
Makes it way more attainable.
Yeah, that whole people making music in their bedroom sort of thing.
Yep.
And it's weird, man. There's a lot of, there's 2 sides of the fence on that, man. There's the people that say, well, that's really a good thing. It allows everybody to have a chance at being creative. And this sort of thing. But then there's other people who really disdain that whole idea of machines and software allowing people not to make a mistake. Sometimes they say taking the human element out of it.
Sure.
Sometimes it's just that they have a disdain for how easy it allows people to do it when they didn't have to practice or whatever, actually even play an instrument. They're just pushing buttons.
Right.
And it's weird, man. There's not a lot of people that I know who play a analog instrument and also at the same time embrace and enjoy the idea of this software making things so easy.
If someone is this is just my opinion, okay? And I'm a guitarist, right? So I play an analog instrument. And I don't know why I put the emphasis on guitarist. That was silly. but I play
See,
guitar.
there it is. Yeah, you have to emphasize when you use these machines that you're an actual artist.
Apparently, I feel special about being a guitarist too. But I play guitar, but I find that I don't find that this ability to collaborate with myself electronically like this in any way, shape, or form takes away from anything. In fact, it amplifies it, because I don't have to get a drummer and a bass player necessarily together so that I can play and practice and develop in a style or write music or any of those things. Now, I would prefer to have human
your end
performers.
result is that after you had it all down,
I would want as much of it performed by people as possible, but I can do that now without having, like before, I mean, the thought of having to have a drum set and all this kind of stuff, it's not practical,
well,
especially when you have like a life and kids. And
I think people on that one side that don't like this, I think those people would agree with you that you could use this technology
at the very least
to sketch out an idea that would be played by real musicians, right? But I think that their disdain comes in when that doesn't happen in the end, when the end result is that you get all of that put out as the song, right?
Yeah.
Now, as a person who has written music completely within the box, so to speak, from the beginning, from 1998, I've written music solely in terms of software or MIDI controllers, where the drums that I'm doing the drums, but I'm doing them with my fingers on velocity and touch sensitive MIDI controllers, and I'm actually playing the piano and all of that, right?
That's a performance.
Yeah, the performance, right? But some people would consider that not to be a drum performance, right?
I know.
But just to be clear about what I'm doing, right?
Well, that's
I'm not just clicking a mouse on everything. But that being the case, there is still the idea that if there's no real analog instrument involved, that you're really not making music, or you're not talented in making music.
Well, saying that, though, the problem with that is you just pretty much cut every person who's not playing an actual strung piano keyboard player out of the musical equation, and you just can't do that, man. You just can't, right? I mean, I'm not trying to be petty or whatever. And anybody that's ever tried like GarageBand, for instance, and composed in GarageBand, that has that attitude has never composed in GarageBand, because it's the same thing. Believe it or not, even though it's on a screen, it's all touch sensitive. So the harder you hit it, the louder the note is. Even when you're playing the stringed parts, it gives you like this weird visual representation of the neck of like a bass guitar.
Yeah.
So when you touch it, the harder you touch it, the louder it plays. You can bend it by sliding your finger, so
you can program all of that into it as well.
Yeah,
because the parameters are still digital, so they can still be programmed in every aspect that you could play.
Yep.
And there isn't no doubt that any electronic musician uses those things.
That's how you give electronic. That's
So-
what gives it an organic feel. Is there's some randomness to it, and little subtle mistakes and bends and things that aren't necessarily all pre-programmed, right? That's how you do it. So to me, because I was my niece, her and I had it out. She wanted to show me electronic music way back when it was way back. This was like 5-6 years ago. And I just shit all over it, man. Like, I was one of those.
Something she did or something somebody else
She was
did?
trying to, because she knew I was a musician, so she was trying to connect with me. And I was just I was a horrible person. Okay, let's just be honest. And so, I'm speaking about this as almost as a, sorry kind of thing. But sorry, Sid. But she tried to, connect with me, I think, in this way. And I was just like, that's not music. And I took like this weird superior high road about the whole stupid thing. And I shouldn't have, okay? Especially in retrospect, that once I started actually using these tools and going, well, let's see what the hell this is all about. I thought it was going to be a joke when I first started playing with it, okay? I was going into it with the sense that, I'm going to do a one-button song, yeah. And found out that that's not really how it works at all, and then started actually using it for composition, and then started making my own guitar backing tracks and stuff with it. So I had to eat some crow and go back and say, you know what? You were kind of right about this stuff. I was just being an old dick about it. That's all. But yeah, I was one of those purists that would just sort of crapped all over it as being, that's not real, you know.
Yeah. It's interesting how there's that difference, right? That's interesting because when you think about it, man, if anything, writing electronic music offers you so many parameters that are intuitively done in acoustic and analog instruments, you know, like so many digital parameters that it's difficult not to screw things up terribly.
The other thing I like about it is the randomness of the whole thing. Gives you the ability to write and compose music using instrumentation, using, you know, because there's like tons of samples and stuff you can pull in as well, and you can change the key of them and all kinds of stuff. But
yeah, like idea generators.
Right. Yeah. It gives you this ability to, like, you know, develop in art styles that you normally probably wouldn't even approach. Ever, or using instrumentation and things like that you may never approach.
And I like sound design too. That's something that most analog people who play analog instruments don't ever get a chance to mess with too much. I mean, you can get all John Cage and have your prepared piano or write random music or something like that, right? But you can't get too far out of the sound of a piano without doing some pretty unique things to that structure, you know, whereas obviously in digital music, you can pretty much spend whole writing sessions just making sounds or rhythms and stuff that you may or may not use in later compositions. You could spend a whole recording session or writing session mastering something where you're not really writing anything, you're just considering how these things sound blend together. You can spend a whole session mixing, you know, where you want levels to be in a certain way. Like if you want a drop to be really loud and you want the things before it to be 3 dBs lower than the one part of your song, you know, so that you can build up suspense or have it not clip out or something at the high, you know, all these things, right, can be considered when you're doing this.
Some people, though, say that the digital recording is killing the soul of music, and because they're like, because, you know, all the imperfections are gone, and the truth of the matter is they're not if you don't produce it that way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, people can still make the music they want.
There's no, I mean, it's a record button. Okay, we used to hit record on the analog tape. Now we hit record on the computer.
Well, there's people like Dave Grohl that's went ahead and made like a whole album in an old-fashioned style with old equipment.
Because
and
there's a natural compression to tape.
Yeah,
and I
still,
get that.
My point is, people are keeping that alive. It's not like nothing's going to beat the hell out of something else, and you're never going to have that anymore.
Right.
It's not going to die out. People that understand the difference, like you just pointed out, and the value of that, like in what he did, that's still going to happen.
I hope
that's
so.
not going to die. I don't think.
Look at vinyl making a big comeback for sound quality.
Did you know there's going to be HD vinyl coming out of Australia?
Was that like 2 needles or something? How are they doing that?
They are using a type of laser to imprint even more accurately the grooves on the thing that stamps the records, and a different type of chemical vinyl composition that will accept these grooves to be more detailed and stuff. And they say it saves, you can add 33% more information, and that the information is more accurate and more clear and transmitted more accurately from the record. And they're calling it HD VD, vinyl disc, HD VD. And it's been funded, and it's out of Australia. You can check it out.
You'll be able to download a file in 5 years, and you'll be able to 3D print your own vinyl records at home.
Possibly. I don't know, man. They had to have a special laser for this, I don't know.
Who knows? Jesus Christ!
But
I don't get the I except for strictly, or not. I shouldn't say. So except for like sentimental value or like something like that, and I understand that there's a difference. There's a warmness to vinyl and things like that. But beyond that, I don't get it, man. I remember I was around long enough ago to remember when records were actually still a real thing.
Yeah,
and they were a pain in the ass to get scratched, and they would just, you had to be a lot more delicate with them. And
I'm sorry, I'm looking for the video.
A video of what? All that,
or not the video, but the information for the HD VDs.
They could have definitely come up with a different name for it.
Yeah, I got so much crap saved that I can't find it anyway. So
Well, we'll just take your word for it that it's out there. If people want to Google it, they can, right? It's out of Australia kind of thing.
Yeah, it's not like I'm saying Jim Carrey gave up making comedy and he's just an artist now.
That's actually kind of true, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying that right now. I'm going to say that later. Hey, see, no.
No.
No, we are not coming to an end.
You don't want to stop?
No, we can stop. We can stop.
Well, we're in 2 hours and 10 minutes, man. Just you and I bullshitting here. It was a good podcast.
I'm sorry,
I had fun.
guys.
What are you apologizing for? This is what these freaks tune in for. Are the no-shitters, man. They're just as weird as us. Dude, this was fun. We had a great show. We talked about I Hit My Mic. We talked about Orco R. We talked about Ancient Aliens. We talked about X-Files number stations. Okay, what?
X-Files.
What about the X-Files?
David Duchovny.
What about David Duchovny?
He's got a new album out. Thank you for asking.
Oh, God, you got to be kidding.
Well, I don't know.
Is he doing the full Shatner?
No. Check this out, dude. I got his first album not that long ago, a couple of weeks ago. It was called Hell or High Water. And I think first of all, the first three people that I played it for.
Kind of talk like this.
No. The first three people that I played it for, all of those people thought that it was somebody that sounded a lot like a young Tom Petty or like, who's the guy that does the parrot parties, that does Margaritaville?
Jimmy Buffett?
Yeah, Jimmy Buffett. They were comparing it with a young Tom Petty and Jimmy Buffett. That's what they said it sounded like. And he's got Berkeley-trained musicians playing and stuff. And I think it's best summed up by this one critic who said that at the very least, he's done his fellow actors proud, which he was making the statement that unlike most actors that go into music that just are terrible and just doesn't go anywhere, that this was actually a pretty decent first album in general.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and if you listen to it, it ain't bad, man. It's like it's pretty good. It ain't bad. I was surprised. I was surprised and impressed. Right? It wasn't just a shit show. It was pretty good. So I don't have no idea what his second album is like, but it has recently come out. I think you can find it like on
there's a
Pledge
lot
Music.
There are a lot of actors though, man, that are pretty decent musicians, or some of them are really good musicians that would surprise you.
Oh, you'll like this. They said he taught himself guitar in 2 years and wrote these songs, and he said that the lyrics were much more difficult than writing the songs.
Yeah.
And I know you have this theory about doing things for 2 years straight.
Right.
There it is. He did it for 2 years straight, dropped this album. I mean, he's an artist. He's an actor. He probably has other ways, just like Jim Carrey, of expressing himself and stuff.
Most of them do.
Yeah.
Yeah, most artists do.
People definitely liked him as his role as Agent Mulder,
Yeah.
And could be that if you didn't have all that in your head when you hear this, it's not that bad. I mean, it's definitely not Shatner.
No, it's
You
not.
ain't going to get Shat out of your head when you listen to Shat. Ain't no way. I tell you, don't think it's Shatner. Good luck.
Well, that's a good one to end on. We'll end on David Duchovny
and
has an
Shatner.
album. Check it out.
Shatner.
No, don't check out. So thanks for listening, folks. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons. Check us out on iTunes. And we just dropped this RSS feed in a bunch of other places, too. A lot of different listing services and stuff like iTunes. So if you're not on iTunes, but you use another service, check us out. We're probably in there. It's the No Shit Cast. KNOWSH exclamation point TCAST, because people don't like naughty words, and somehow turning the I upside down negates that. But thanks for listening. We're glad you guys tuned in. Can't wait to talk to you again, and we'll catch you later.